It was the end of the day on a sultry Friday, when the billionaire appeared at the door of the living room with a glass of whiskey in his hand and that laughter that cannot be explained, but felt, a laugh full of barely concealed intention. His friends were nearby, his children playing in the living room, and the babysitter, Maria, arranging the toys scattered on the carpet. He said loudly, with an air of theatrical generosity, "So, Maria, ready to go to the party tomorrow? I want to see you there with us. See? Look good." The group laughed, muffled laughter, but visible. Those laughs that exchange glances and slide down the side of their mouths, as if they knew a joke that the target still didn't understand. She stopped for a second, stood up slowly. She looked at him, eye to eye. "Yes, sir. Thank you for the invitation," he said in a low but firm voice. Then he put the toys back together, folding a towel with millimetric care, as if that gesture could silence the laughter that still echoed on the walls. Inside, his heart was beating strongly, not out of fear, no more, but for a sensation that she didn't know how to name. That was not an invitation. It was a social trap. A joke, disguised as inclusion, built to be funny only for those who never knew what it is to not be truly welcome. Maria knew that kind of game. I had already seen up close what happens when the invisible accept invitations that were not made to be accepted. She grew up seeing her mother being reminded that she was only a maid. He heard his father repeat that, in certain places, black people enter just to serve, but she also learned from them to dress in dignity, even when the world threw rags at them. That night, alone in her rented room, Maria took a dress from the back of the closet, one that I had never used. He took the tape measure, checked measurements, then he sat up on the bed and thought. He thought about his laughter. She thought about the eyes that expected her to know how to put herself in her place. But she had grown tired of this place. Gradually, something inside her asserted itself, not as anger, but as a decision. Not going would be reaffirming their laughter. Go would be to assert its presence. And Maria knew, sometimes, it is in the absurdity of the invitation that lies the chance to tear up a script that was never made for us like her. And in that silent choice, she planted an answer, not for them, but for herself. On Saturday morning, while the city was still waking up between hurried coffees and impatient horns, Maria was already sowing within herself the courage to appear. His presence was always expected behind the scenes, in the corners, in spaces where faceless efficiency, nameless care is required. But that day was different, and she felt it on her skin, like someone who walks under a sun that burns differently. In the mansion where she had worked for almost 7 years, she has always been the shadow that keeps the light working. She was the one who calmed the children when they were agitated, who kept silent so as not to disrupt the meetings, who listened to the pain of the bosses in empty outbursts, without ever being invited to share their own. There, everything was subtle, but firm. The laughter that came before the door closed. Those good morning that only happened when someone was around. The calculated silence of someone who didn't need to say that you don't belong, because the whole system already screams it with its eyes, with its gestures, with the invisible codes of conviviality. No one had ever said with words, "You can't go to that party," but everything said, the expensive carpet, the glasses that only came out of the closet on special days, the boss's dress coming straight from Paris, the whispered conversations about who would be there, the lower tone of voice when she entered the room. It was as if the entire mansion conspired to remind her of her place, and that this place had no crystal chandeliers or invitations embroidered with gold paint. When she walked through the gate to go to the beauty salon in the suburbs, she felt the looks of the neighbors, some curious, others amazed. Perhaps they wondered where he was going. With that look so resolved, Maria knew they weren't used to seeing her like this, with strong lipstick, head held high, straight eyes. As the hours passed, the party guests arrived. Long dresses, tailored suits, loud laughter of those who think they are eternal. And in the middle of it all, the buzz ran. Is she really coming? Did you see what he did? Guys, imagine if she really appears. There was no direct evil. There was something worse. There was an expectation of the failure of others as a form of entertainment. The silence there was choreographed. They didn't need to say they laughed at her. They laughed among themselves, hiding their mockery under sips of champagne. and they waited, as if waiting for the inevitable mistake of those who dare to cross the line that was never made to be crossed. But what they didn't know was that that line had already been broken in Mary's soul, and it was in that interval between the derision and the waiting that everything began to tremble. The night fell with the kind of glow that only big parties know. The main street of the upscale neighborhood was partially closed for the parade of luxury cars. Lights positioned on the walls cast golden beams over the facade of the mansion. The sound of classical music mixed with the clinking of glasses already filled the air with a specific kind of rehearsed grandeur. There, everything was staging. Every detail, every gesture, every look programmed to affirm a single thing: we belong. And then she arrived. There was no spotlight facing the side gate, but it was there that Maria entered, as she always did, with discreet, almost invisible steps. But not that night. That night, she did not wear her usual uniform. She wore a navy blue dress with an elegant cut, tight to the body without being vulgar, bought in 3 installments with the money she had been setting aside for almost 2 years. The earrings inherited from their grandmother trembled slightly with each step, as if they also knew they were entering where they were never invited. The hair tied in a high bun, the makeup simple but firm. Everything about her was present, but a presence without permission. A presence that, alone, was capable of tearing the social choreography of that space like a line crossing the veil. As she passed the first group of guests, the murmur was barely perceptible, but it existed. It was as if time went back half a second to try to understand. Is she really here? Her eyes followed her as if trying to remember where she knows that silhouette from, and then they recognized it. It was the nanny, the one who took the subway early, who waited for the gate to open with the lunchbox in hand, who smiled at the children and disappeared behind the curtains. Now, she was there, as if she were one of the VIP guests, as if he had the right. But Maria felt everything. He felt the questions hidden behind his eyes. He felt the judgment that was not spoken, but weighed in the air like expired perfume. I felt the bodies moving away in disguise, the soulless smiles, the cordiality cold as cracked porcelain. And even so, it remained, because she knew there was no flaw in being what she was. The flaw was in the script, a script written by hands that would never have imagined that someone like her would dare to improvise an entrance. He stayed for a few minutes next to the drinks table, noted, breathed, silenced, and he did, as if each step said, "I know where you put me, but I decided not to stay there." And as she walked through that icy room with sharp eyes, she still didn't know that this was just the beginning. Her presence was like a whisper that no one wanted to hear, but everyone listened. The hall, once so full of conversations, began to become a space of tense silences. His eyes avoided it. The glasses filled faster. The laughter that used to burst easily now seemed carefully calculated. That woman who for years had walked around the corners now crossed the center, not as a servant, but as a symbol. The employees recognized her from afar, but hesitated to wave. It was as if seeing Mary there, like that, was both a miracle and a threat. And among the guests, the perplexity grew like a diffuse nuisance, difficult to name. The discomfort of those who are forced to see those who have always chosen not to see. The navy blue dress she wore, so simple and dignified, became a wordless affront. His skin, once invisible, now reflected the light of the chandeliers. His upright posture seemed to accuse without a voice, just for existing. It was as if her every move, no matter how small, disorganized the silent certainties of everyone there. And the hardest thing for those arrogant eyes was to recognize that there was no mistake. She didn't stumble. She didn't cringe. She didn't apologize for being there. She offered no embarrassment. They were the ones who saw themselves stripped of him. For the first time, the discomfort was not in the black body that entered, but in the white eyes that needed to remake themselves before him. The party went on, but something had changed. The conversations became whispers, the steps more contained, music more distant. It was as if the whole scenario was trying to protect itself from the idea that someone like Maria could, yes, be there without having to ask permission. She stopped near the main staircase, as if feeling the weight of the scene. There was no audience, but there was judgment, and it was different from the trials she knew. It was not that open, harsh, declared judgment. It was the kind of judgment that comes from within, the gaze that measures, that calculates, that tries to return you to the place where they should never have taken you. But she didn't come back. He didn't lower his eyes. He did not apologize for belonging to his own body, nor for existing with beauty, with honor, with dignity. And at that exact moment, the mansion ceased to be a place of luxury only. It has become a mirror that gave back to its owners the reflection of what they never wanted to see. In that instant, a voiceless truth began to reverberate through the walls, and it was about to take shape. That night, Maria said nothing, but everything in her spoke. His posture, his presence, his serenity. It was as if she had learned to occupy space not with noise, but with meaning, and that, perhaps, was what most destabilized everyone around, because they were used to seeing it inside a frame, a fixed, predictable image, the woman who serves, who is grateful, who is content with little. But there, without the apron, without the submissive tone of the function, the image that everyone had of her was broken. And when an image breaks, what is left is true. She walked around the room with the firmness of someone who had learned to support herself. He did not seek approval. He didn't beg for attention. He just walked, and that was enough to disorganize certainties. The simple, humble, homely, the nanny woman. She was now a figure who silently challenged the social imaginary. There was no mistake to be corrected. There was a vision to be rebuilt. Because what those eyes saw, at that moment, was not the Mary they projected. She was the real Maria, the one who read poetry in her room after work, who memorized the lines of classic movies while washing the dishes, who knew how to talk about politics, faith, motherhood, pain, with the depth of someone who lives all this up close, without filter, without privilege. They had underestimated her so much, who now did not know where to put it. The elegant dress was not what shocked. It was the way she inhabited it, without apologizing, without seeking permission. That was the most challenging, because it showed that the problem was never the place itself, but the way in which the place is denied to those who do not fit the mold. And Maria knew. I felt it in the crooked looks, in the swallowed words, in the attempts to pretend normality. But she also knew that this discomfort was not hers. It was theirs. She no longer carried the weight of invisibility, and that set her free. It freed as only those who have been imprisoned a lot are freed, by looks, by narratives, by tiny expectations. That night, she was no different from what she was. She just let the world see her in full, and it was this mirror that the others could not sustain. But what none of them imagined was that that vision would not fit in the old frame again. Her presence could no longer be ignored. It wasn't just a black woman at an elite event. It was the idea that someone coming from where she came from dared to exist there without bowing down, without disguising her origins, without apologizing for being who she is. It was as if each gesture of hers, no matter how simple, denounced an old absence, that of black voices in places where only the echo of the privileged used to sound. For many at that party, Mary was an affront, not because he screamed, not because he confronted, but because he breathed dignity, because their presence required an internal overhaul that few were ready to face. The harshest glances came not from strangers, but from those who knew her in silence, those who crossed paths with her in the corridors, those who received her polite messages in the group of employees, those who pretended not to see her when she opened the door. Now, she was there, and that was noise, a nuisance, an unanswered question. Some looked away out of genuine discomfort, others out of pure repression. There were those who pretended not to see her. There were those who smiled condescendingly. But everyone knew, deep down, they knew, that this moment was not small. It was a maid who said first, softly, to the other next to the kitchen, "She looks beautiful," and it passed from mouth to mouth as a sacred secret. The house's employees looked from afar, through cracks and half-open doors, as if they were witnessing something that had belonged to all of them. It was more than a pretty outfit. It was more than entering where you don't expect it. It was recognition. It was a sign. And Maria felt it. He felt that, even among the discomfort, there was something being born, something invisible, but palpable. A kind of respect that is not said out loud, but is perceived in the way the space around it begins to give way. As if, for the first time, she didn't need to prove herself. Just allow herself to exist whole. She didn't want to confront. I didn't want to cause it. But it did. Because when someone who has always been on the margins stands up, the center needs to reorganize itself. And in that silent rebalancing, a new name began to emerge. He saw her. And for an instant, time broke on the billionaire's face. The crystal glass stopped halfway to his mouth. The smile, which used to appear automatic to please the audience, hesitated at the corner of her mouth, as if she had forgotten how it was formed. Mary was within a few feet of him, but the real distance was much greater, an abyss dug by years of elegant indifference. She didn't make a scene. He did not see it as someone who demands reparation. It just was, and that was what destabilized him. The woman he knew by the name of a badge, who he saw behind the scenes, who listened without listening, who greeted without looking into the eyes, was now there with the posture of someone who never needed his permission to exist with greatness. He approached, with restrained steps, and he said something like, "You really came, huh? It's beautiful." There was no sincerity. There was fright. There was control. There was, above all, that all-too-common attempt to dominate the situation with rehearsed gentleness, as if the power were still in his hands. Maria just nodded, thanked, and he looked away elegantly. He didn't know what to do with it. From then on, he avoided crossing paths with her. He strayed discreetly whenever he saw his silhouette approaching, laughed louder with friends. He returned to his comfort zone, but the discomfort remained stuck to the back of her neck, like a reflection that refuses to go away. It was as if he knew, deep down, that the game had lost its way, who, by trying to make a joke out of her, had ended up exposing her own mediocrity. And that, perhaps, was what bothered him the most. The belated realization that he had become a supporting player in a narrative bigger than himself. A story that did not bend to its money, to its social codes, to its cruel lightness. The guests noticed, some pretended not to notice, others exchanged complicit glances, but no one dared to comment, because they knew that night had become a symbol, not by shouting, not because of scandal, but by presence. The party continued. Yes, but it was no longer theirs. It was hers, and even without saying a word, she had already turned that place into silence, and silence into territory. She didn't know it, but there were eyes behind the curtains, eyes of those who learned to hide to survive. The maids, the cleaners, the cooks. They all interrupted their automatic gestures when they saw her cross the room. The dishes remained unwashed, the tray to be completed, the floorcloth stagnant on the tile. It was as if time had created a fold, just so that everyone could see what no one had ever dared to show. One of us entered, and he did not enter to serve. He came in to be, to exist whole, without lowering one's head, without asking permission, without disguising one's roots. Each step of Maria reverberated like an ancestral drum in the hearts of those women. It was as if she was stepping where they had all dreamed of, but could never tread, not because they couldn't, but because they were convinced, with silence and contempt, that they shouldn't. One of them, the eldest, who had worked there for more than 20 years, put her hand to her chest and whispered, "She has courage," and for a moment all the others agreed without saying a word. They didn't need to. The feeling was collective. It was as if Mary was walking not only for herself, but for all, as if, by wearing that dress, she was sewing years of invisibility with a line of dignity. There was no audience, there was no applause, but there was something deeper. There was an impact, there was seed, there was an open crack in the thick wall of each one's place, and in that crack, hope was born. Her presence activated silent memories, from the maid who wanted to be a lawyer, of the cleaning lady who wrote poetry in secret, of the cook who one day thought about studying fashion, but had to raise her children alone. They all saw in Maria not just a colleague in uniform, but a mirror of what she could still be. And that hurt, yes, because remembering what was lost always hurts, but it also healed, because to see that there is still a way, healing. That night, even between dishes, commands, and obligations, the employees knew something had changed, not in the bosses, not in the salons, but within them, and that no one could take away. What Maria didn't know was that, when she left there, she would not only leave a hall, but would leave a path lit that others would follow. She didn't stay until the end. When the fireworks began to explode outside, announcing the height of the party, Maria was already crossing the silent garden towards the side gate. There was no hurry in his steps. There was a decision, There was a firm calm of someone who knew that what he had come to do there had already been done. He talked to a few. He answered smiles with kindness. He looked around one last time. He recorded the hall, the looks, the silence. Then he lowered his head briefly, not in submission, but as if offering an intimate closing prayer. And then he left, without making a fuss, without asking for anything, as if she carried inside the blue dress an ancestral secret that did not need to be explained. The next morning, his name was on the lips and on the screens. A photo taken discreetly by one of the guests ran the networks as if carrying a code. And the black woman who dared to be seen, the nanny who became a symbol. It was just an image. Mary standing, alone, under the chandelier at the entrance. Serene eyes, simple dress, but there was something in that captured moment that touched beyond aesthetics. It had to do with presence, with the strength of existing with wholeness in a place that tried, for so long, to reduce us to fragments. In less than a week, the emails, messages, invitations came. Fashion agencies wanted to meet her. Beauty brands were looking for her story. Television programs asked for interviews. She turned down many. He accepted some, but always with the same criterion. I would only speak where I was heard, not exploited. Gradually, she stopped being called by the old title. She was no longer the nanny. It was Maria, only Mary, and that was enough. It was enough because, finally, the world began to see what she had always known, that value does not live in the uniform, in the last name, in the place where you sit at the table. The value lies in the courage to exist in full, even when the whole world wants you to be divided. Today, she walks the streets without hiding her face, but also without ostentation. It remains simple, firm, serene. He has not forgotten where he came from, nor of those who tried to prevent her from going. But she carries something else now, the certainty that the problem was never her. The mistake was the soil, a soil that did not recognize its roots, and that, therefore, did not flourish. Mary flourished, and with it, the idea that one night is enough to change an entire narrative flourished. One night is enough, a dress, a choice, and a silent gesture of those who know. Truth is the greatest argument. If this story touched something inside, don't let it pass in silence. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, share it with those who need to be seen, and comment below what you felt. This space is made for us, by us. Here, every black voice matters, every story counts, and every gesture of support helps keep our truth alive.